Now, on to a very fortuitous meeting for my husband Malcolm and I when we went to the Polly in Falmouth for an event. We sat next to this really interesting gentleman called Guy English, and here he is.
In the flesh.
Guy is going to talk to us tonight about Holy Wells, and he has written a fantastic book, Holy Wells of Cornwall, Odyssey and Memorial. It's a fantastic read. Having flicked through it, it's a fantastic read. These are on sale tonight, £20 each, cash,
or card.
or bank transfer. Guy is willing to take any of those. So there are copies about, if you want to have a look at them, do come have a look at them. They're really, really interesting. And Guy also has a really useful website as well. So, Holy Wells. Guy's going to tell you all the detail about them. Normally they were dedicated to a local saint. Holy wells were once widespread throughout Britain and were important features in the medieval sacred landscape. Over centuries, pilgrims sought the healing powers of their waters, and many visitors left symbolic offerings in the form of jewellery, coins and ribbons tied in the trees. They shine a light on Cornish culture from pre-Christian times through the Celtic Christianity and the medieval period. He will be doing a Q&A at the end because I'm sure we're going to have a lot of interesting questions. Put it together for Guy English.
Thank you. All right, for a start, can anybody hear me? Right, okay. I do tend to start like this, and if it tends to drift down a bit, just shout at me and I'll remember you're here and speak up again. Firstly, who am I and why on earth am I, with a name like English, telling Cornish people about their wells? For many years I worked for Kodak in London, and I used to come down here to sail. And when Kodak didn't need me anymore because everything went digital, I thought we'd retire down here in 2000, 2001 and come and sail more. So I finished up sailing and then gig rowing, and in between times exploring the county. The 90s my wife and I spent in the States. We were working there and dumped in a completely strange and rather alien culture. We had it in mind to explore our environment as well as we possibly could, and found we knew much more about it in the end than most of the locals. So when we came here to Cornwall, we also put ourselves out to explore it. And like everybody else, we started by walking around the coast path twice because we only had one car. And there is a little bit of Port Isaac we never got to. It'll become apparent why. And then, for a complicated reason I won't bother with, we started exploring all the tributaries of the River Foy as they tumble down independently off Bodmin Moor in exciting runs of chutes and falls and clapper bridges and so forth. And that came into this story. So let's go back now and start with... I'm going to have to keep standing in your way a bit, and I'm going too far. Right, okay. Why did we do this? Curiosity. We're just curious. Busybodies, some people called us. Why do you want to know that? Who cares? When? 2015 to 23. And who? It was myself and my late wife, Catharine, and latterly, consultation on producing the book. He produced more photographs, better photographs than mine, and he designed this book, which we turned up with. But we didn't know Phil Cope at the time. That all turned up later. And how we did it, well, listen and I'll tell you. Of course, you find wells. If you're going around Cornwall at all, you bump into wells, don't you? You see Madron Well, with that unfortunate Wishing Well sign on it. This was one which particularly struck us. That's San Creed. And that hole there, if you're not familiar with San Creed Well, it goes down a number of steps into a bit of a cave, and the water's at the bottom. And somebody very kindly leaves a little pack of night lights there and a lighter. So you can reach down and put night lights on shelves, rather like a candle in a cathedral perhaps, but also you can see. And so there's little night lights being left around there. And some people think that's one of the most spiritual spots in Cornwall. We all vary in our spirituality. I don't personally get much energy out of stones and things like that, but I do appreciate them. So that's a classic one. Not in any book is the second well at St. Crede, about a quarter of a mile away, which is similar, and nobody knows about that one except a collection of hippies who live there. That's when it gets interesting. So that's a classic well. This is not a classic well. Which one am I thinking of here? Fairy Wells. Yes, it is. I beg your pardon. Easily mistaken for another. This one is called Fairy's Well, or Carbis Bay Well. That's where it is. It's on the path from Lelant to St Ives, which goes along past the railway and so forth. And at some point, if you're going from Lelant to St Ives, you will pass it and you won't notice it. If you're coming the other way and you're really, really looking for it, you'll see a little set of steps quietly going down off the path and looking as if you're going to fall down to the beach about 50 feet, which you would if you were careless. And as you go down that, tucked into the hill there is this exquisite little spring. And don't step back too far because you will be on the beach and in trouble. And you'll also note that this has a lot of cluties around it. I gather people argue a lot about cluties, so we won't get into that argument. People leave them by wells and other places of spirit, and traditionally the idea was they would be natural fibre clothing or other mementos which would rot away, and as they rotted your problem would go, be it physical, mental or the neighbour. Nowadays people put up lycra and laminated photographs and so on. Their problems will not go away. Please don't do that. The well at Madron is especially prone to those, and there are hundreds, and every now and then a group of people go and clear most of them out, and they're back again in days. And it's quite extraordinary, and you can't even see where the well is there. So those are two classical ones. And then, as part of our exploration of Bodmin Moor and the River Foy, we found ourselves looking for Foy Well. We were told there was a Foy Well. We were told it's easy to find. Well, it's not. We found the source of the Foy, which moves up and down a lovely valley, depending on the wetness of the season, and that's interesting enough. But up to one side, on the slopes of Brown Willy, there's a lot of old tin streaming work and a lot of holes in the ground. There used to be a chapel up there, St Anthony's Chapel, for the miners, and supposedly one of those holes, in which I'm told you can hear water rushing, is Foy Well, and it's the well that the miners used. I wouldn't actually go to the stake to say we'd found it. We found quite a lot, but I wouldn't know that we'd actually found that. But it set us off on the way, so that's well number one. It's not number one in the book for other reasons, but it's the first well we found. Officially. And then, a little while later, we're not going in strict chronological order here, but climbing up a steep track back up towards Warleggan on Bodmin Moor. When I say steep, we were more or less on hands and knees. It's that sort of track. It's a cobbled track of mud, and we were getting pretty muddy. And it's below a medieval-looking farmhouse called Trengoff, which probably hasn't ever seen a tractor. And we found this well, which you can see looks somewhat ecclesiastical. Somebody's taken the trouble to build a well house around it. Somebody's also taken the trouble to put a plastic basin in it and a pipe, and the water is being used for farming, which is just fine by me. By that time, we'd bought John Mayrick's book on the Holy Wells of Cornwall, which at the time was the most complete and informative of all the books. So we looked in that and it wasn't in it. So we then, over a few weeks, bought all the other books we could find, starting with Quillicooch sisters' book of the 1890s, using their father's notes and chasing around after the wells themselves to complete the stories. And then various vicars with not enough to do have done their own books as well, the Legates and a couple of others, Lane Davis. Then there's another one, there's Merrick himself, and then there's a photo book by Phil Cope, which is the first time we came across him, of a small selection of more photogenic wells. And we've got all those things here for you to look at, but don't steal them, because they're our precious things. Cheryl Straffen's another one who some of you will have heard of. This is quite a witchy lady, rather nice. And she did what I think is sort of hurricane tour around Cornwall with a friend, visiting the wells of the more spiritual kind. It's also a useful book. So once we decided this well was in no book, that suddenly became a challenge and an obsession. How many more are there? So we kept an eye open for them. We asked people about things. People told us. Catharine, who at one time used to make maps, and another time she took a theology degree, it was meant to be geology, but it turned to theology. So if you put those together with making maps, she was actually perfectly fitted for finding holy wells. It was clearly what she was destined to for the first 60 or 70 years of her life. And so we scoured the 2.5-inch maps, all of which we have are there. We never travelled without all the books and all the maps in case we happened to come across something. And you can find things on that. You can find a path which seems to go to a stream and stops without any purpose. It'll be there because that's where people went to get water. Maybe a spring there. We find places called with words beginning Venton or Fenton. Both of those are cognate perhaps with fountain, and that usually means there's a well. Venton Vedna up near Helston, for example, which you can't see. It's under a cider press. That took a bit of finding. Then we thought we'd better get a bit organised about this. So we'd got a tourist map of Cornwall that we marked our progress around the outside with. So we bought another one. My glamorous assistant will help me here. I've promised not to saw her in half. I know you need her. So all those stars and a few dots are wells, and each one has got a label out in the sea somewhere near it. Is that better? Shall we walk slowly along this way?
That way?
Oh, you do. If we have it here, it'll get lots of that. That's better. That's better. Okay. Now I've done this several times, so quite a few stars have fallen off. But you can get an idea. It's a heck of a lot of wells. There's a couple, the red ones, I have actually visited one of those, but not the other. We had red stars when we hadn't been to it yet, and we red dots when we hadn't been, and then put a star in when we had. And so we measured our progress, steadily panicking. Will we get to the end? No. Anyway, welcome to look at that. Yep, but I need a bit of paper from underneath, so I remember who I am. So then for several years, when we needed a day out, and it was generally Thursdays for some reason, or sometimes another day if the weather was right, we'd set off with some wells to find in mind. We'd go to Bodmin, for example. There's 5 wells in Bodmin itself, or we'd be up on Bodmin Moor behind at Blissland, where there's quite a concentration, or we'd be down in far Penwith. And when the days were long, in the summer, we'd head off as far as we could up to North Cornwall and over to the east. And when the days were a bit shorter or the weather was bad, we'd try and save some nearby ones to use for those days. So there was no particular order in which we did this, and if you look for order, you won't find it at all. It's a random walk. I've called the book an Odyssey. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is Odysseus too had a random walk around the Mediterranean, trying to stay away from home and the chores, and that's what we were doing. He also lost his whole crew on the way, of which more anon. So we've got a process, we've got some maps. All the other maps are up there. Welcome to look on them. There's several things happen to wells. Some of them get lost. Oops, done that. Oh yes, I'll cover the table. Right, in the book you'll see a table like that covering about 8 pages, and it's for anybody who really wants to know, in each of the other books, this book or everybody else's book, which page it's on and where the grid reference is. Somebody far too late said, are you using these 3 words? But no, we're not. Tough. and then there are comments there which aren't actually in the book. Because as we went round, if we knew we were going to a particular well, we'd be fidgeting about looking in these different books, saying, who's got it in it? Is it Mayrick? Is it in Lane Davis? And what page is it? And some of them number their wells by pages, and some of them number them numerically, so they're not on the page that the number is. So we started making a big Excel spreadsheet which we carried around with us, so if we were looking for a well we could go directly to the book and the page, which saved a lot of bad temper. A certain amount of bad temper. With this project this size you've got to have a plan, haven't you? Okay, that's Chapel Porth, Porth Chapel Beach, and that is where the well was, but it clearly isn't there now, and nor is the chapel. So that one sort of well is one that isn't still there. I gather some archaeologists are going to try and recover what's left of the chapel, which is a bit further down the path. We had several goes at that, but eventually on one of them it was a wet day and there was water coming out there. We might perhaps diverge and say, what do we mean by a well anyway? If you're coming into the country the first time, you're spear and bow and arrow and following some reindeer, one of the things you'll need is a water supply. So where there are springs, you would notice that, even if you were a nomad. And when you come to have a community, you'd pick a place with a spring, wouldn't you? So it makes sense. And so nearly all our communities have spring water supplies in the first place, even if South West Water has usurped the business. And those would become very important to you. They might become sacred. In very early religions, everything was sacred, a bit as native Australians have. Everything's got its spirit, and a spring would certainly have a spirit. Later on, when you get to Christianity, Christianity seizes on religions that have been there before, and they take on these things. And in Cornwall in particular, we have our special varieties of Cornish saints that the Pope doesn't approve of, usually missionaries passing through between Ireland, Wales and Brittany and back again. All their stories occur in all of those, and lots of them happily have attached themselves to wells. And those are wells we call holy wells. Wells could become holy in other ways, though. Some people feel that every parish should have its holy well, and you could make a well holy if the bishop said so, sometimes if the priest said so, but in particular in pre-Reformation days you always had some relics in a church under the altar, and if you washed your relics in a well, that was another way of making it officially holy. Some wells have never been made holy, and we'll finish up with one or two of those, and some they're clearly very spiritual places, but we don't necessarily have a saint attached. We'll have some of those too. So that's lost and being resought. Here's another one. This is St Gluvias well. St Gluvias is just by Penryn, and it's just by where we live. And there's Old Well Gardens, is a modern housing estate in Gluvias. So we went and had a look around, and we found that, which is not terribly attractive, is it? We asked about and found a lady who said her mother used to take a horse and cart with the washing down to this and do the washing in it. The cart track had become a footpath, and the footpath had been clogged with somebody's hazel cuttings over about 20 years. So we cleared that out again, and then we came back with a bit of muscle, and we cleared this well out, and now it's kept clear. And we shamed the council into taking away the 3 huge piles of rubbish, metal, plastic and vegetable, that we'd found in it. And it's now a rather nice little place. Instead of being a place with a few syringes in it, there's a nice little green space there. We're quite pleased with that. Unfortunately, it's dry. When the housing estate was built around it, they disturbed the water supply and the well dried up. They also wrecked the well, and were told, you can put that back. So they did, and they didn't make a bad job of it really. It's pretty much well-like. So wells get restored as well as disappearing. Back in the day, some vicars cleared out wells, particularly around Bodmin Moor. There was a chap who took a lot away, thinking that his parishioners were paying more attention there than they were to his church. Another chap pinched a well completely and parked it by his church at St. Jenny. It already had a well, but he thought a church with 2 wells better than a church with 1 well. That's true of pubs, but I don't know if it's true of wells. I put in, for some talks, I put in some just round me because it helps people. That's St. Mylor. It's a bit of a fraud. St. Mylor is supposed to have turned up on the obligatory millstone about 411, and the church dates from then. The churchyard was extended some time back, about 1880 or something, and it had a variety of springs in it. But so they drained it a bit and consolidated them all into that one, and parked some stones round it. So the children dress that one in a rather cardboardy sort of way. It is looked after. But it's St. Mylor. St. Mylor is the same chap as St. Mellor. Second homes are nothing new in Cornwall. As St. Mellor, he has this fine well in Lincolnhorn, way over the other side of the county, maybe a bit of a staging post for him. The odd thing is that St. Mellor, definitely the same person, didn't come in a millstone to there. You're far from the sea. He was a younger brother, which at that time was often fatal. Like Vikings, you bumped off your younger brother because you didn't have to share the estate with him. So his elder brother, whose name I don't know, sent a couple of brigands to bump off young Mylor at the age 7, but they must have been really incompetent because they only succeeded in cutting off a hand and a foot. In due course, being saintly, he was equipped with a silver hand and a bronze foot, which as he grew and aged became living parts of his body. They came back and killed him properly at 17. But his body would not lie in the ground, another sign of sanctity. It wouldn't stay under until the brigands had been properly dealt with, and then they were. So he's got this other one here. Another little digression. Don't expect me to just to wells. I went back there, that's my wife clearly, and I went back there with Phil Cope because he thought he hadn't been there and then said he had when we got there, but we went into the wrong field. And I was the other side of a bog and a Cornish hedge and some barbed wire and another bog. And I thought, well, we can take a picture from here. I'm not getting on that lot. And then I realized there was a sheep in bog 1 right by the well, up to its withers, I don't know if its withers are, up to its neck in mud, and clearly given up. Well, sheep are basically suicidal anyway, and it may have been happy about this, but I couldn't leave it there. So I climbed through the bog and over the fence and over the wall, having thrown the map to Phil, who didn't know what was going on. He hadn't actually realized what I was doing. I disappeared and somehow got the sheep out of this without going in myself very much. And eventually I got it on its feet. It didn't want to be on its feet. It wanted to roll on its back and die. And I got it on its feet, and then it thought, okay, all right, I'll live. So I went off to find the farmer. All this took about an hour, in which Phil was wondering what I was doing and getting just a bit on the grumpy side. He'd left his phone in the car, so I couldn't ring him to tell me what was happening, and I couldn't find the farmer. It was one of those days, but it's a lot of things happen when you hunt wells. Let's come back a bit nearer home again, because this is a nice easy one to find. That's St. Piran's well, not the one at Perrinwell, which no longer exists, definitely. This is at Perrin-ar-Werthel. As you come from Truro, you pass the Norway Inn. And if you stop at the Norway Inn, which I heartily recommend, except if you're tall, then you go up the track to the right of it, past the old lime kilns, and climb quite a long way up, at which point you find a sign which says private, public footpath, and you go back almost down to the level you were on before, slippy slidey, tree ferns and all sorts of things. And there's this lovely well. And the plaque, slightly unfortunate plaque, tells you that the water is still used for baptisms at the nearby church. And that's something you find quite a lot. So that's a nice one to show people. This is another nice one, a bit nearer you. When I was down in St Buryan, one farmer told me he hadn't been further than Penzance. I'm sure most of you go further than Helston, don't you? Well, equally, I'm sure you could live a very happy, fulfilling life without leaving Mullion. But if you do leave Helston and you go on the Falmouth Road, just where there's a caravan site on your left, there's a well on your right. It's a bit unmade, and I don't know if you're supposed to go up there, but I do. And somebody recently has made a nice grassy path down to it with a proper railing to show that this is the path to the well. And that is a lovely little beehive, not beehive, little well. And there's always water inside about that deep, so wear bare feet or wellies. And there's 2 seats inside you can sit on, and there's offerings inside it and so on. It's a beauty. Grass roof. It's clearly been restored, of course, as all these things have, if they're loved. The story about that one is that they were trying to build a church, but the crows kept taking the stones away, and they were only left with enough to build the church porch. Well, that isn't big enough to be a church porch, it's about that high. So there's clearly a problem with scale in this story, but that's what you get. It's St Wendrona, it's in Wendron Parish, St Wendrona. Sounds female, doesn't she? You can't make an educated guess on the gender of a saint. Some of them are extremely unclear. I don't know what she is. This is another interesting one. That's Ban's Well at Mount Hawke. And to me, that's perfectly clearly an adit. It's not a well. It's an adit. It's been drilled into the hill by some small children to drain a mine. But it's attracted a lot of cluties. So, each to your own. Let me go to the other extreme. Right up the other end of Cornwall near St Cleather, in fact. Just this side of Lanston. Bit of a haul. Well worth it. One of the nicest walks we had finding a well is there. You walk through the churchyard as indicated and along a beautiful open green valley, stream and some ponds running down to it, smell of gorse in your nostrils, birds singing, wondering why you're there, and round the corner you come across a big well house, a big chapel. This is just the well house. Here is a big chapel, quarter the size of this room. It was completely ruined. There are photographs in it of what it looked like until it was restored in the 30s, I think. The well is on the left there, and the water runs into the chapel, across under the altar and out the other side. It's a beautiful place, a really nice place. Come down a bit from there, and we're just north of Loo now at St Keen. St Keen's Well has 2 staircases leading down into it. It's a nice big thing. And that has the special property that the first one of a couple to drink of it will wear the trousers. And there's a poem comes in the books and things like that about a chap who asks a local, and he tells him this at length. And he says, well, I guess that knowing all this, you were first at the well. I was, he said. I ran straight here after the ceremony, but my wife outsmarted me. She'd taken a bottle to church. Anyway, we drove away from there, and we got about 10 miles coming home, and we thought, hang on a minute, it's our son's wedding day tomorrow. And you might wonder how we'd actually forgotten it was his wedding day tomorrow, but somebody else was organising. It wasn't us. We just had to show up. We haven't brought any water. Well, we've got a bottle in the car and it's got water in it. We could say we got it there. But who do we give it to? So we decided to say nothing. And I don't know what the answer is either. It's a lovely story and a lovely well. Now, St Neot, he's another second. Oh, no, that's gone wrong. This is Caervalach. Where's St Neot gone? Okay, perhaps I've skipped St Neot. This is Caervalach. We're going to have a few lizard wells now, and there's one missing at least, which I'll mention. Caervalach is Trelugga. There's a rambly lane that leads along below that, and you can go down to Tremaine Quay from it. Well, if you park where you're going to park to go to Tremaine Quay on foot, and you to go uphill instead, up a track, there's somebody building a sort of hippie home up there, and that is Caervalach Well, supposedly holy. Nice place. This one is St Martin. It's at Martin rather, but it's St Martin's or possibly Materiana, and we scrabbled around for quite a while to find that, and that is actually where it is, but it's had a shed built over it and the farmer's using it for farming. Fine by me. Easier to appreciate, St Anthony in Ménage in the churchyard there. There was a funeral going on, so we were a bit sort of bashful about getting involved, but the verger came over as the coffin left and said, "Come on, I'll show you." So that's a nice little one. I don't think we drank from that one. We tried to drink from all of them unless it really doesn't look a very good idea at all. So about 80% of them we drink from. This one, sometimes you fall over things, and sometimes when you get there, it's just a disappointment. This is at Tregonal, and it's supposed to be a holy well. It's in the other books and so on, but somebody is building a water park there, and it's going to look wonderful one day, but it isn't a well anymore. Downer. One that I haven't got on here is St Kevin. If you're in St Kevin and you walk down the hill northwards down Well Lane, and then there's a footpath, there's supposed to be a well down there, and we searched and we searched, and we asked the lady with the dog, which is very important, and she told us it used to be here, but she hasn't seen it for ages, and we found a manhole cover, and we photographed that. Sort of point. Anyway, subsequently, last year I had to be in Porthala, because I had yacht engine troubles, and that's where you go for that. And I thought, I'll go and have another look. There's much less foliage at this time of year, and I might find something. And there, 10 feet from where we'd been previously, well, there's a splendid well or spring, stones around it, all formed, gouting water and fit to bust. So St Kevin Well is fit and well, just isn't in my book. Sorry. We did, however, when we were a bit lost, found Trelugga Well, which is, well, it's where Trelugga is. There's, near where there's a deserted church with the roof off, around that sort of area. Yeah, yes. I've got it on the map in the book. But I wanted to show somebody it last year, and I was completely convinced it was on the left-hand side of the track as you go away from the road. It's a drive to a farm. And I was wholly convinced it was on the left. And all I could find was one on the right, which I hadn't seen before. So sometimes wells sort of dance about a bit. Sometimes, too, they come and go. We'll come across that in a minute. They just aren't there anymore. They are. And then the prize one on the lizard, of course, is St Ruan, which is an absolute delight. And I do recommend, if you don't go and find any other wells from Mullion, go and look at St Gerada Well at St Ruan. It's beautiful. And so it looks like inside. Little offerings and nicely kept. And then for something completely different, this is a oh, that's interesting. That's St Neot popping up. Okay. He was probably always there. I've simply got my order wrong on here. That's nice to see him. Yeah, St Neot, it's at St Neot, and you walk across a nice squashy field to it, and the plaque on it says restored 1831. We shouldn't think they're not ancient because they're restored. If we go back a long, long way, and one of the last ones I'll show you is St Julian's Well, which is said to be the oldest extant original well house, and that was probably 13th century. Well, that's 700 years ago, but these wells and the Cornish saints were 700 years before that, or 8. So what was there before? Probably wooden structures, like most churches were wooden. But it's a testimony to the power they have over people, that people do build things century after century. They replace these and enlarge them and replace them when they fall down. They've had a grip on our forebears for a long time. Now, and St Neot, you have to go into the church for this, to get to all the stories in the stained glass window. An angel gave St Neot, who was a hermit, of course, 3 fish in the well. And he told him that as long as he only ate 1, there would always be 3. So that's fine. Unfortunately, after a bit, his servant, hermits have servants, cooked 2 fish. Perhaps they weren't very big. And there they were on the plate. And St Neot chided him and said, put them back in the well, which he did, and they came back to life, and normal service was then resumed. We'll come across St Neot again in a bit. How far have I got with him? That was, yeah, this one. This is one of my all-time favourites. I've got a number of all-time favourites. I changed the order of them from 1 to 1.1.9. This is called Fenton Bebibel, and it's up on the far Penwith moors within sight of the Ding Dong mine, just north of the Menantol, which many of you will know. Stone with a hole in, you climb through, etc. And this is actually the start of the stream which comes out at New Lynn, by which time it's a rushing torrent most of the time. But here it's just about flowing. And that's Catharine doing a bit of gardening in it. She found some coins in there and sort of tucked them away a bit, so as not to encourage that too much. I like to take people up there who don't know Cornwall, and we do the Menantol and then that. I took 7 people up there just after New Year, and we walked over from the north coast and found the well, and then they went and climbed through the Menantol in proper manner and all the rest of it. They were from far away mostly. And then we walked back over the top via the watch point and down to the Tinner's Arms for a good slap-up lunch in front of a roaring fire. And that's what I call a good day. When I gave a talk to this on this subject in Penzance to a lot of well fanciers, which was a bit scary, I didn't realise they were coming, but they were very welcoming, and they invited me, it was in February, they invited me on Good Friday to join them at the Menantol car park at 11 o'clock with some gardening implements, and we would walk up there and clear away the well and remove excess foliage, and then dunk dollies. So, dolly dunking at Fenton Bebibel, say that 5 times fast. So that's what we did, and there were all sorts of people who were big in these things there, and some quite grumpy ones. About 40 of us, and we walked up there and we cleared stuff away and pulled the reeds back and so forth, and got the muck out of it and got it flowing a bit. And then we had pastries, not pasties, but pastries. We had some hooch, we had speeches in Cornish and English, and we dunked dolls if we'd brought them. I hadn't, I have since. Don't know how long that's been going on. It's a tradition. It's known to have, it was recorded in 1935, which isn't all that long ago. Well, it is to most of us quite a long time ago, isn't it? But the assumption is that that was a restoration of an earlier tradition. Now, Fenton Bebibel means the well of the little people. And when Catharine and I heard that first, we thought from our law, so to speak, from other parts of the country, that that means the little people, the fairy folk, the people who'll change your children for their own to ensure they survive. Other people think, no, it refers to children going and baptizing their dolls in it. So those 2 strands must meet somewhere, but I'm not going to get involved in the argument of which is right. But that's a lovely place to go. Dodging about. This was really disappointing. It's St Cuby's Well at Doulo, and it's a lovely well with a beautiful bowl inside. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it as a well, except that it's by the main road with a sign saying St Cuby's Well, and there was no fun in that whatsoever. So it was disappointing in a different direction. There was no challenge in that at all. It's St Cuby. Now the story here is that it's got a beautiful bowl, which it's got saliva around it now, so you can't easily read it, but it's got Saxon runes around it and things like that. And somebody decided it would be a nice ornament for him, so he got his ox cart and his oxen, and he put the bowl in it and set off home, only to find his oxen died and his son died and then he died, and the bowl found its own way back, as is proper. Let's go to Cuby's other home. What's he doing down here anyway? He's St Cuthbert. He's in Northumberland, being carried around his coffin for 100 years. But this is St Cuby's cave in Holy Well Bay. They say you have to have a very low tide to get there. You don't have to have a very low one, just a decent low one will do. And you go from where the beach hut is to let you onto the beach. You go about a quarter of a mile to your right, looking carefully at the various caves, and one of them you'll see has steps formed in the rocks, and you can go up in there. This is a sort of travertine terrace. This is salts which have crystallized out of the water as it comes down, and it's brightly colored. This doesn't quite do it justice. Some of the other photographs in books do. They really are brightly covered. It's not been photoshopped, and it's extraordinary. It's quite slippery, but if well shod, you can go right up there out of sight into a cave which is above high water mark, and the water up there is fresh. Now I don't believe St Cuby lived there as a hermit at all. He might have gone down there on his saint's day or something like that, or somebody might. But just to make it a bit simpler, if you come back off the beach and go about half a mile inland, there's a village or a hamlet which is innovatively called Well House, and that's where Cuby's Well House is on a golf course, and that's a nice thing to see as well. So that's two St Cuby places. Okay, about this point, what would be 2018, we'd been storming through this. We think another year of doing 60 wells a year we'll finish this. And we had a bit of a problem. One of those conversations you don't want at 2 in the morning. You know, are you awake? Depends. Do you think this is what they call a lump? And yes, of course it was. So the rest of the year was involved in all the trappings of tests and biopsies and chemotherapy and stuff. So we didn't do very much that year at all. You can't really. There's only 2 or 3 days a fortnight when you can do things. We got out a bit, but really we slowed right down. And then the next year would have been just great, except it was my turn because I hadn't been paying proper attention. So I had all sorts of treatments. But we did get a few bits more done in 2019. Including finding lovely ones like that. That's another all-time favourite well. It's a bit further to go. That's at Pellint. And when you get to Pellint, you're about a mile from it, but it's about 5 miles along lanes which you can't pass anybody on. So you have to be lucky to get there. And it's absolutely exquisite. There's a hairpin bend where you can leave a car, and then you walk down a track towards a farm which you can't see. You can't see any houses. And a little sign in the hedge says, well. And there are steps down here. You curl around, and there's this beautiful little well with a beautiful bowl in it with Saxon runes on it and saliva on it, which apparently has also been taken by a chap with some bullocks. And you mustn't waste a good story. Who knows which is the original one? And this is just a beautiful spot. There's the bowl. And that's the scene from it. It's really steep-sided valley. You can't grow anything except sheep or possibly goats in there, and that runs right down to the sea, and there's not a soul in sight and not a building in sight. And I thought it was just impossible to believe there could be anything wrong with the world or with us. It's just an idyllic place. I commend it. Bit of a haul from here, worth the trip. Now, all this time, we hadn't intended to write a book or anything like that. We thought we might do something with all this material. Every day when we got home, Catharine, who was an inveterate recorder and diarist and so forth, would write down immediately the experience of the day, just as a sort of travelogue, without worrying about fancy writing or anything like that, just recording it. And I would file the photographs and try to remember which one was which and things like that in a much less orderly manner, which I paid for later when I was trying to sort them out. and that's all we were going to do. We thought about doing a website, but that's a big hassle. And then I discovered Andy Norfolk's website. And if you really want to know about Holy Wells, look at his website. And I realised that he'd done it all, and far more than I had. He's got 4,000 wells all over England. He's got the crosses, he's got the circles, and it's beautifully done. So I didn't tell Catharine about that. I just shut that and said, well, that's going to spoil all the fun. We weren't going to do anything with it anyway, so we don't need to know that. We'll do this for ourselves and for our own pleasure and our friends. So that's where we got to with that. Anyway, 2020 arrived, and COVID on the horizon, that sort of thing, and we were still functioning, but Catharine was beginning to find herself rather wheezy and not managing stuff. We had looked for Venton Laddock several times, which is just off the Laddock Road from the A30 down to Truro, and it's north of Laddock itself. And we couldn't find it. We'd hopped around looking at farmers' blue pipes and things like that, but we couldn't find anyone to ask. So we were, on this occasion, we'd gone up to Laddock Church and we were going to try and find it from the top. Instead, we found this little gate, and then that beautiful little thing there, which isn't Venton Laddock at all, which does exist and found it later. It's St. Leodica, believe it or not, and that had been restored by the local Old Cornwall Society. And very nice it is. It's about so high, and you can open the door and water comes pouring out, and it's lovely. But that was Catharine's last well. It turned out that things hadn't gone as well as we thought, and she faded out a couple of months later. So what could you do then? Well, it was locked down for COVID. You couldn't do anything, lots of bureaucracy to do, all the stuff. I went off with one or two people when I could to pick off another well or revisit one just for old time's sake. What's that? That's not Rautor. What's he doing there? Whoa! Don't know what he's doing there. Well, let's let him think about it a bit. So then a couple of things happened. One was that I've been boring people at Wells so long. My daughter sent me a Christmas present of a book on Welsh springs by Phil Cope, who has also done a limited book on Cornwall, really a photography book rather than the well book. And it was just lovely. So I emailed him on Christmas Day saying, that's super, Phil, well done. I'd been going to do something similar in Cornwall. Having seen yours, I'm just going to toss it in the bin. And he came back the next day saying, for heaven's sake, don't do that. It's time for another book on Holy Wells in Cornwall. Why don't we collaborate? So we did, and in 23, yes, 23, my years are getting muddled up so soon. 23, he came down a couple of times for long weekends, and we hit a few wells that I hadn't finished, about 20 of those. We tore around doing that and taking more photographs of the ones we'd got. and then spent the rest of the year on the telephone to each other, shouting at each other, with him trying to change Catherine's prose and trying to get more of his photographs into the book, and me trying to resist all that. And one way or another, by the end of 23, we had a book in prospect, and it went off the printers and came back in February, and there it is. And a lot of the beauty of it is due to Phil. But the other thing that contributed to that, and why I wanted to do it, was doing all those disaster years when we couldn't do very much. We'd had another project on the go which we could do from home, which was exploring the life of a botanist from Flushing who had been completely lost. And we'd found her because we were trying to follow the history of our house. And we'd got the idea, because it said it in a book, that an admiral called Sullivan had lived in it. And he's an interesting chap. He was this first mate on the Beagle going around the world with Darwin and Fitzroy. And he'd, at some point in his career, he'd gone to the Falklands, because he liked that when they were there, and ranched there for a bit with some new horses and cattle for the Falklanders. And his wife had nothing to do except bring up children, so she went and picked the flora of Falklands and sent them to a Miss Warren of Flushing, who showed them to Lindley, it says in Sullivan's biography. Well, who the heck is Miss Warren of Flushing, and how did she know Lindley, who's the head of the Royal Horticultural Society? So bang went 2 years of evenings and internet work, and up to Kew and over to Maidstone, where she spent some time, and we produced a biography of this really rather splendid botanist and algologist, seaweeds for the rest of us, who was made a bit of a stir in her time as one of the 12 most important female scientists of her century. And just as I was being sent the book on Wells by Phil Cope at that Christmas, our book, which we hadn't really published, we'd just put it in libraries and societies, our book won a prize. So at that point I thought, oh, our stuff can't be that bad, let's make something of this, and that's what we've done. However, meanwhile, back at the ranch, I kept on visiting wells a bit. This is Row Tor. Why there's a holy well on Row Tor, you might ask. Probably St Michael's Well, because Michael was given most of the high rocky places to go. Anything that was a previous pagan site, hill forts and things like that, churches now, them are normally dedicated to St Michael as being a militant archangel. So there's Row Tor in the background. We had enormous difficulty finding that. We couldn't find it from the grid references given, because in the older books, grid references, if there are any, are on 1-inch maps, so it's about 100 yards square, even if it's right. So that's not easy around there. And eventually on Cheryl Straffen's book, she said, I found the stream and went up to it. Smart lady. So we did that, and there it is. You can't miss it, can you? Absolutely can't miss that. I went back there to show a friend it subsequently, and we could not find it. It was not there. It was a filthy day. It was pouring with rain. There were lots of streams instead of one. It's like the molehill trick, isn't it? Burying your gold under a molehill. And it was blooming well not there. Back again another day. There it was. There's an element of brigadoon about it all. You have to go on a Wednesday, not a Thursday, is what I decided. That's the book we did. I'm just thinking about putting it on Amazon because people keep asking about it. And this is at St Neot's other well, and that is not St Neot. It is actually Phil Cope. The camera is the giveaway there. And this one it's way up at Launcells. Have I got that right? I keep forgetting exactly where that one is. Poundstock, I'm sorry, Poundstock. It's on the way, a footpath from Poundstock down to the sea, and halfway down the footpath you go over a ridge and down, hoping you've got the right field, and meander along the bottom of that, a stream, a wooded stream, and a barbed wire fence, and eventually there's a gate, and you pop through the gate, and you turn right, and there's this lovely well, restored by Victorians in 18-something or other, and there's a mug on a chain which just reaches the water. They did not put one link too many on that chain. So that was a good find. And what St Neots doing there, I don't know. Why there's a community there, I don't know. My suggestions is he'd left it behind at a picnic. If you want big well houses now, you really have to go to Callington to Dewpath. That's just outside Callington. You go to a farm, you park in the farmyard, and that bit of it is owned by the National Trust, and you can visit it. It's massive. It's probably 20 feet by 12. Some of those stones in it are very large lumps of granite indeed. They really use good ones, whereas the top of it looks like card house technology, but it's still standing. And inside there's a pool. The water runs in the front door across the middle of it and fills the pool and then dribbles out of the back. Oh, I should mention pools. There's a couple of places. Alternun Well has one, and St Clear had one, although that one's disappeared. They had pools which were known as bowsening pools. And bowsening, for the uninitiated, is where you're shoved backwards, to your great surprise, into cold water, and they're reared up again. And it's supposed to be good for the feeble-minded or the miserable. We laugh, but a lot of people saying their health is great, mental health greatly improved by cold water swimming. And that every day at Flushing and in Falmouth, and probably lots of other places, there are a large number of people, mostly ladies, often of a considerable age, and often not wearing wetsuits, who will go swimming for 10 minutes at this time of year and look very much happier for it. So maybe bowsening isn't so daft after all. We ought perhaps to mention some of the other reasons you might go to a well. To get healed, for example. Now, strings of wells have healing properties attached to them, by no means all, and by and large, most of them are said to be good for eye defects and stomach problems. And you might think, well, perhaps it's the only clean water around. But others do have supposedly other things, weak children, rickets, things like that. In Meyrick's book, there's a table of which well is supposed to be good for each thing. And Victorians used to go around measuring the specific gravity to see if there was actually anything dissolved in the water. Of course, now we understand homeopathy, we know that the more dilute the better, so you won't get very far with specific gravity. Some wells taste filthy, and that's normally iron. They're called chalybeate wells, and that's got to do you good, like Tunbridge Wells water. You might also go for prophetic reasons. You could ask a well a question. It was often, am I going to marry the curate? And there's a lot of records in Quilacooch's writings and things like that of thoughtless maidens going and dropping bent pins, their best bent, or bent coins. Again, the spirits like things better bent. And dropping them in wells, and you count the number of bubbles that come up, and that's how long it'll be. If no bubbles, the answer's no. If you get bubbles, then you get 4 bubbles, you can decide for yourself whether it's 4 weeks, 4 months, or 4 years. And many wells had a lot of that sort of thing in them. People have gone and taken it out in their explorations mostly. But it used to be quite common to find pins and coins in wells, as well as other offerings, and of course sometimes coins, proper coins. It's an interesting, distinctly pagan feature that you should be asking that sort of thing of a well. It's oh yes, this is nice. We talked about wells that have disappeared. This one's reappeared. This one is beyond Morva. Go on a bit, and there's a place called Kegwin, K-E-I-G-E-N, Kegwin Farm, higher and lower. And the people who took that, who oddly enough are called Guy, found this well up above them, and it turned out a farmer had blocked it off because his cow had fallen in it and he'd lost a cow, so he'd closed it off. And they have had a mason re-establish it rather beautifully with a bit of a stile in front which a cow can't get through, but we found a 2-year-old can. And just in here they've got a niche with a beautiful stemmed porcelain cup in it that you can sip the water. It's lovely water. The farm above is called Noon Farm. Well, Noon is a St Nun or Nonna, as in Alta Nun, or St Nonna at Pellint. So they are calling this Nonna's Well. And it's an absolutely lovely spot. And I found that halfway through producing this book, so we added it in. So wells recover, wells reappear, wells disappear, wells reappear. Now to finish off, this gives you an idea of density. There are maps in the book, and the map wouldn't help you to find a well. What it's for is you can say, well, I'm in Lostwithiel, are there any wells near me? Ah, they're on page so-and-so. That's about. The idea of writing the book was quite simply, we had so much fun, we'd like other people to as well. There's some lovely walks in it, and there are some which are right by a car park or right by a churchyard. You don't have to go far. But we found we were exploring bits of Cornwall that we'd have gone to for no other reason. An example would be Menheniot, on the way to Plymouth, just off the A38. I knew about the place because I used to work with a chap called Menheniot, presumably came from there once. But you'd never go. But there's a well there to St Lullaby, who I'd not heard of either. So one day I was having lunch in Plymouth, so I turned off to find it and found this exquisite village. If I worked in Plymouth, I'd want to live there. It was just lovely. Nice person said, oh, come along, I'll show you where the well is. And it had a super church, which used to be dedicated to St Anthony, but they'd had it changed back to St Lullaby by typing a letter to the bishop. I'd never heard of such a thing. Children were in the churchyard having lunch. Every time the weather's fine, they said. I had a lovely time there. This one, we're just going end to end now. This is St Julian's Well in Mount Edgecombe Park. A bit of an epic getting to it, which I won't trouble you with. And it's the most easterly well. I number my wells west to east. So number 1 is the next one you'll see, and this is number 238. And it's said to be, as I mentioned earlier, the oldest genuine well house that hasn't been altered, about 13th century. And it's nice. It's got detail inside it. It's quite big. And this is the other end. This is St Warner's Well on St Agnes Island, Isles of Scilly. There are several wells on Scilly, but this is the Holy Well. And it's a lovely little place. You used to miss it if you go around the coast path on St Agnes. It was just down to your right, and you had to know it was there. Somebody's altered the coast path to go past its front door. I slightly disapprove. A bit grumpy about that, but it's a nice well and very drinkable.